Have you ever felt haunted by someone who doesn't exist? A shadow that follows you through ordinary days. A presence that sits in the corner of every celebration, every achievement, every moment of supposed contentment. This ghost has your face, but it's the face of who you could have been. The writer you never became because you chose security over stories. The entrepreneur you abandoned because you feared failure more than mediocrity. The artist you buried because you listened to voices that said, "Be practical," instead of the one that whispered, "Be brave." This isn't nostalgia. This is something far more devastating. This is the slow, suffocating grief of the unlived life. The weight of dreams deferred until they became dreams denied. The ache of potential that turned to poison in your veins. You feel it in quiet moments. When you're scrolling through others' successes. When you catch yourself saying, "I always wanted to," with the past tense doing all the damage. When you realize you've become a spectator to the very life you once imagined starring in. The ghost of your unlived life doesn't scream. It whispers. Remember when you believed you were capable of anything? Remember when fear was just a feeling, not a life sentence? Remember when you had dreams that made your heart race instead of reasons that made it stop? And the whisper cuts deeper than any external wound ever could. Because this isn't about what others did to you. This is about what you did to yourself. The slow murder of possibility. The systematic assassination of your own potential. Carl Jung saw this tragedy played out in every consulting room, every life that walked through his door. He understood something that modern psychology still struggles to grasp. The greatest suffering isn't what happens to you. It's what doesn't happen through you. Jung called it the unlived life. The shadow of who you were meant to become. The psychological wound that never heals because it's constantly being reopened by the simple act of being alive, while not being who you are. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung wrote, is to become who you truly are. But most people spend their lifetime running from this privilege. They choose the safety of the known over the terror of the unknown. They pick the comfort of conformity over the chaos of creation. And then they wonder why life feels like a slow death. Jung understood that we don't just have one shadow. We have multiple shadows. The shadow of our repressed desires, the shadow of our denied emotions, and the deepest shadow of all, the shadow of our unlived life. This isn't the person you were told you couldn't be. This is the person you told yourself you shouldn't be, the dreams you talked yourself out of, the paths you refused to walk. The life you sacrificed on the altar of other people's expectations and your own fears. And this shadow doesn't just disappear because you ignore it. It grows stronger. It becomes the critic that tells you you're too old to start. The voice that reminds you of every time you failed before. The internal prosecutor that builds an airtight case for why you should stay exactly where you are. But Jung knew something else. This ghost, this shadow, this haunting presence of who you never became. It's not your enemy. It's your invitation. Let's do something most people are too terrified to do. Let's dig up the bones of your buried dreams. Not the reasonable dreams. Not the practical aspirations your parents approved of. The wild ones. The impossible ones. The dreams that made other people uncomfortable because they were too big, too bold, too you. What did you want to be when you were 7 years old? before anyone told you it was unrealistic, before you learned that dreams need to be backed up by safer options, before you discovered that wanting something desperately was dangerous because disappointment hurt too much. That 7-year-old had access to something you've lost, pure desire uncorrupted by probability. Jung believed that these early dreams weren't random fantasies. They were messages from what he called the self, the deeper intelligence that knows who you're meant to become before the world teaches you who you're supposed to be. But then life happened. Teachers who said you weren't talented enough. Parents who said you needed to be more realistic. Friends who said you were dreaming too big. A culture that rewards conformity and punishes authentic ambition. So you learned to bury the dreams, to suffocate them with logic, to starve them with neglect, to murder them with the slow poison of maybe someday. But here's what Jung discovered in decades of working with the human psyche. Buried dreams don't decompose. They fossilize. They become archaeological evidence of a life that was meant to be lived. And every day you spend not living that life, the ghost grows stronger, the shadow gets darker, the haunting becomes more intense. Because you're not just avoiding your dreams, you're avoiding yourself. The part of you that believed anything was possible. The part that was brave enough to want what seemed impossible. The part that was willing to risk everything for something that mattered. That part didn't die when you buried your dreams. It went underground, and it's been sending signals ever since. You know the symptoms, even if you've never named them. The dreams where you're someone else, living someone else's life, making choices the waking you would never make. These aren't random neural firings. They're your psyche showing you the life that's still possible. The sudden, inexplicable sadness that hits you when you see someone living your unlived dream. It's not jealousy, it's recognition. Your soul seeing itself reflected in another person's courage. The way certain songs make you cry for reasons you can't explain. The lyrics aren't just words. They're elegies for the person you never became. The books that call to you, the movies that make you feel like you're remembering something instead of discovering it, the stories that feel like they're about you even though you never lived them. Jung understood these weren't symptoms of mental illness. They were symptoms of soul sickness, the disease of the unlived life. You've developed what Jung might call a complex around your abandoned dreams. A psychological wound that never heals because you keep reopening it. Every day you don't write the book is another day the writer in you dies a little more. Every day you don't start the business is another day the entrepreneur in you withers. But the cruelest symptom of all, the way you've learned to comfort yourself with the illusion of someday. Someday when you have more money. Someday when the kids are older. Someday when you feel ready. Someday when the timing is right. But Jung knew something about someday that most people never realize. Someday is the place where dreams go to die. It's the psychological equivalent of a hospice, a place where you keep your dying ambitions comfortable while they slowly fade away. And the ghost of your unlived life feeds on someday, because as long as you're planning to live your real life later, you can avoid the terror of living it now. Here's the truth that's going to sting. The greatest betrayal in your life wasn't committed by someone else. It was committed by you, against you. You betrayed your own dreams. You abandoned your own vision. You chose other people's definition of success over your own definition of meaning. And you did it so gradually, so reasonably, so responsibly, that you didn't even notice it was happening. Jung called this the slow murder of the authentic self. It starts innocent enough. A dream deferred for practical reasons. A passion put on hold for financial security. A calling ignored because the path wasn't clear enough. But each compromise creates a precedent. Each rational choice makes the next abandonment easier. Each time you choose safety over authenticity, you train yourself to believe that safety is more important than authenticity. Until one day you wake up in a life that makes perfect sense to everyone else and no sense to you. You have the job that pays well but drains your soul, the relationship that looks good on paper but feels empty in practice, the lifestyle that meets all the external markers of success while failing every internal measure of fulfillment. And the ghost of your unlived life sits across from you at breakfast every morning, reminding you of what you traded away. Carl Jung understood that this betrayal doesn't happen because we're weak or stupid. It happens because we're human, because the terror of living authentically is greater than the pain of living inauthentically, at least at first. But here's what Jung discovered in his decades of psychological excavation. The pain of living inauthentically doesn't stay manageable. It compounds. Every day you don't honor your truth is another day the truth grows more demanding. Every year you don't feed your dreams is another year they require more desperate nourishment. The ghost doesn't get quieter with time. It gets louder. Jung observed that most people experience what he called the midlife crisis around age 35 to 40, but he didn't see this as a psychological breakdown. He saw it as a psychological breakthrough. The moment when the ghost of the unlived life becomes too loud to ignore. This isn't about buying a sports car or having an affair. This is about the psyche's last desperate attempt to course correct, to reclaim the abandoned dreams before it's too late, to resurrect the authentic self before it's permanently buried. But society pathologizes this awakening. They call it instability, when it's actually the first sign of stability you've shown in years. They call it irresponsibility, when it's the most responsible thing you could do. They call it selfishness, when it's actually the end of a lifetime of self-abandonment. Jung understood something that your well-meaning friends and family don't. You can't live someone else's definition of a good life and expect to feel alive. The ghost of your unlived life isn't a problem to be solved. It's a message to be received. It's your psyche telling you that you still have time, that it's not too late, that the dreams you buried are seeds, not corpses. But the window isn't infinite. There comes a point where the ghost stops whispering and starts screaming, where the unlived life stops being a possibility and becomes a permanent regret, where someday becomes never, and you have to live with that for the rest of your days. Jung called this the death of the soul while the body lives on. The walking dead, people who are biologically alive but psychologically deceased, who go through the motions of living while feeling nothing because they killed the part of themselves that was capable of feeling truly alive. But you're not there yet. If you're watching this, if you're feeling this, if the ghost is stirring, you still have time. Here's what Jung discovered about the unlived life. It's not actually dead. It's dormant, like a seed that's been waiting underground for the right conditions to sprout. The dreams you buried are still alive. They're just waiting for you to stop being afraid of them. But resurrection requires a kind of psychological surgery. You have to be willing to excavate the parts of yourself you've been hiding, to feel the grief of all the years you spent living someone else's life, to mourn the person you could have been while celebrating the person you still can become. This isn't about quitting your job tomorrow and running away to join the circus. This is about something far more radical. This is about becoming who you actually are instead of who you've been pretending to be. It starts with a simple but terrifying question. If you knew you couldn't fail, what would you do with your life? Not what would be practical, not what would make others happy, not what would be financially secure. What would you do if failure wasn't a possibility? That answer, that immediate, visceral response that comes before your rational mind has time to edit it, that's the ghost speaking. That's your unlived life reaching through the grave of your excuses to remind you it's still breathing. Jung believed that the unlived life contains our greatest source of energy, the passion we've been suppressing, the creativity we've been stifling, the authentic power we've been trading for the illusion of safety. But accessing this energy requires what Jung called active imagination, the ability to dialogue with the parts of yourself you've been ignoring. Close your eyes. Imagine sitting across from the person you could have been, the version of you that followed the dreams instead of the fears, that chose courage over comfort, that refused to let other people's limitations become your ceiling. Look at them. Really look at them. What are they wearing? How do they carry themselves? What's in their eyes that's missing from yours? Now ask them the question you've been avoiding. What do you need me to know? Listen to what they say, not with your rational mind that will immediately start arguing. Listen with the part of you that still remembers what it felt like to believe in impossible things. They might tell you about the book that's still unwritten, the business that's still unstarted, the relationship you're still avoiding, the move you're still postponing, the conversation you're still not having. They might tell you about the years you've wasted apologizing for wanting more than you have, the energy you've squandered trying to convince yourself that settling is wisdom instead of fear. They might tell you that it's not too late, that the dreams you buried are still viable, that the life you imagined is still possible, that the person you were meant to be is still achievable. But they'll also tell you the cost. Living your unlived life requires you to disappoint people, to let go of the image others have of you, to risk failing publicly instead of succeeding privately at something that doesn't matter. It requires you to choose uncertainty over security, to trade the known for the unknown, to step into the very territory you've been avoiding because it scared you. Jung understood that this dialogue with the unlived self isn't comfortable. It's confrontational, because your unlived life doesn't just want your attention. It wants your commitment. It wants you to stop talking about someday and start acting like today is the only day you're guaranteed. Here's what no one tells you about confronting your unlived life. It's going to hurt everyone around you. Not because you're being cruel, but because you're being authentic. And authentic action in an inauthentic world feels like violence to those who've made their peace with pretense. Your family might not understand why you're suddenly dissatisfied with a life they've watched you build for years. Your friends might feel judged by your refusal to continue participating in conversations about everything except what matters. Your colleagues might feel threatened by your sudden unwillingness to play games you've been playing for decades. Jung understood this resistance isn't personal. It's systemic. The world is organized around keeping people in their assigned roles. The economy depends on people choosing security over satisfaction. Relationships depend on people staying predictable. Society depends on people not asking too many questions about whether they're actually living or just surviving. When you start living your unlived life, you become a disruption to this system. You become proof that settling is a choice, not a requirement, that the limitations others accept are optional, not inevitable, that the life you've been told is impossible might actually just be difficult. And that's terrifying to people who've built their entire identity around accepting limitation. So they'll try to pull you back. They'll remind you of your responsibilities. They'll question your mental health. They'll share statistics about failure rates and stories about people who tried what you're trying and failed. They'll do everything they can to convince you that your unlived life should stay unlived. Your courage to become who you're meant to be reminds them of their cowardice to remain who they've always been. Jung believed that the goal isn't to completely abandon your current life and start over. The goal is integration, to bring the energy and passion of your unlived life into your actual life, to stop seeing them as separate territories and start seeing them as parts of the same map. Maybe you can't quit your job to become a full-time artist, but you can stop making excuses for why you don't paint on weekends. Maybe you can't move to Paris to write the novel, but you can stop pretending you don't have stories to tell. Maybe you can't overhaul your entire existence overnight, but you can stop betraying your authentic self one small choice at a time. Integration means asking different questions. Instead of, how can I completely change my life? Ask, how can I honor my unlived life within my current life? Instead of, how can I become someone different? Ask, how can I become more myself? Instead of, how can I escape this life? Ask, how can I enliven this life? The ghost of your unlived life doesn't need you to burn everything down. It needs you to stop pretending it doesn't exist. It needs you to acknowledge the dreams you've been ignoring, to feed the passions you've been starving, to take the small, daily actions that keep your authentic self alive while you figure out how to give it more space to breathe. Jung called this the path of individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are instead of who you've been conditioned to be. It's not a destination you reach, it's a direction you choose, again and again, every day. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, every time you choose meaning over money, every time you choose growth over comfort, you're not just living your life, you're resurrecting it. The ghost of your unlived life is watching this with you right now. They've been patient. They've been waiting. They've been sending signals and signs and dreams and sudden moments of inexplicable sadness. They've been trying to get your attention. This is it. This is their moment. And yours. You can close this video and go back to the life you've been settling for. You can continue making excuses for why your dreams have to wait. You can keep feeding the ghost with promises of someday while doing nothing today. Or you can finally admit what you've always known. That the person you were meant to be is still possible. That the life you imagined is still available. That the dreams you buried are still breathing underground, waiting for you to dig them up. Jung spent his life studying the human psyche. He understood something that most people never realize. You don't have to choose between being practical and being authentic. You have to choose between being alive and being safe. And safety is just another word for slow death. The ghost of your unlived life isn't haunting you to torture you. It's haunting you to save you from a life of regret, from the slow poison of resentment, from the suffocating weight of knowing you had potential you never actualized. It's offering you something most people never get: a second chance, a course correction, a resurrection. But only if you're brave enough to stop running from who you're meant to be and start running toward them. The question isn't whether you're too old, too broke, too busy, or too scared. The question is whether you're too alive to keep pretending you're dead. Your unlived life is waiting. It's been waiting your whole life. Don't make it wait any longer.